Today what we're going to work on is we're going to do two more techniques. So the first technique we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a monochromatic painting. And you can see here how I have a really light shade there. It's a little bit darker. And as it keeps moving forward and we keep layering it, you have your darkest in front. So you have your background, your middle ground, and your foreground. So we're going to create a monochromatic landscape. The second thing we're going to do today is we're going to practice wet on wet painting technique. And that's where you load the paper up with just water in your brush at first, and then you add in your paints to create a night sky. So there's two different examples of that. So let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need your watercolor and a brush, a cup of water. And my plate here that I'm using is because I don't have the actual lid to be able to mix my colors. And then in your packet, you should have had 2 half-size papers. Okay, so I'm just going to take this one for our first technique. So what you're going to do, get your brush wet, and you're going to choose one color. So here are my examples. I've done purple, and I've done blue, and this is going to be a 2-step process. So we're going to do this today, and then we'll go back and we'll add more to it with other mixed media techniques on another day. But first things first, I think I will have my monochromatic be green. So I'm going to load my brush up with green, but what you need to make sure you do is keep adding water so it can be a light shade, because that first layer, you want it to be very, very light. So let's see. I could probably go even lighter if I wanted. So you're just going to fill up that bottom half of your paper. I'll dip in my paint that I've mixed. I can also just dip my brush into the water to help push the color along. So our goal is to layer this up. And once you start adding water to this, the paper will start to bow. So you can see it's already starting to bend up. Okay, so we'll let that dry a little bit. So give it a moment. I need it to lay flat so I don't have that edge. Okay, so now you want it to dry a little bit, otherwise you're not going to have a nice crisp line where the next layer will be. So I'm going to let this dry and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've let this dry a little bit. So now I'm going to go back to my green in the palette. And now I'm just going to make it a shade darker, only a shade darker. And remember, as you layer it up, you're going to create it to be darker anyways. But as you can see, my paper is still pretty wet, so I'm not going to have that nice crisp line. So I might just let it sit a little bit longer to dry. So we're not getting a good view of the middle ground. So I'm going to go and finish this layer so it's even, but I'm going to let it sit and dry a little bit. Okay, so I've let my first layer dry, and I had to let my second layer dry too, because you can see my paper was too wet. There was no crisp line to show the difference between the background and the middle ground. So let me try this again. So remember, you just want it to be a shade darker, and I'm going to go in and add, there we go, much better. So that's okay if you run into that. scenario that I just did where your paper is just still too wet and you can't get that crisp line. That's okay. Just take a break, let it dry, and you can go back to it. So now I'm going to just fill this in. So this whole bottom section's the same tone. Sometimes you have to dip your brush back into the water to reload, because your goal is to get the paint to move evenly and smoothly. So I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes so I can add in another layer. Okay, so let's go ahead and add another layer. So again, you're going to darken your color, and you just want it to be a shade darker than your last layer. I'm going to just brush all that down. So you can see my different layers. So I'm going to let this sit and dry, and I'll add just a little bit more detail. Okay, so I am just going to add one last little thing here. So I got 3 layers so far. So now I'm going to add in my final layer, but it's going to be in the very front, so in the foreground. So again, I got my color, and I might just add a little bit. Darken it up a little bit. Now, if you're doing this at home, you might want to put a paper towel underneath so you don't get paint on table. I don't want you in trouble. I don't want to be in trouble for getting paint on furniture. So you have in here the background in the distance. So the lighter it is to show distance. So the lighter, the further away it is. This is a little bit closer. You have this as your middle ground, and this very front here is your foreground, meaning it is right in front of you. So just imagine you're looking out in the mountains and your feet are right here and you're looking out and seeing the distance. Okay, so the next activity we're going to do is we are going to do what's called wet on wet painting. So these are some examples. We're going to create a night sky. So go ahead and get out your second piece of paper. And remember, it's the little one. I think it's a 6x9 size. And make sure you have your cup of water, paper towel. So what you're going to do is you are going to load your paper with water. Now, you probably want to switch out your cup of water, get a fresh container. Otherwise, what might happen is you're going to end up with that tint. So you can see here, I don't know if you guys can tell, but there's a little hint of green when I do this. So I am just going to load this thing up. I'm going to saturate this paper, and it's going to start to bow. And when it does that, what I typically do is I might set my water cup on this corner, and then I might hold this corner. Or if you have access to tape, you could tape it down to a piece of cardboard or onto a table if that's okay. I'm just going to load this paper up. So you can see I already got green right there. I think it was on my finger. So it's starting to bow, and that happens. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in a few of my stars. So I'm going to my yellow, and I'm just going to simply make a few dots. And they're going to just kind of move on their own. So they just kind of spread out on their own. This one's going to run off the page because the paper's kind of bowed. So I might do a little bit more. Maybe I'll make it a little bit brighter. You can see my Now you can really see it shift and change. I'm going to change this so it sits there. That might help. So right now my stars are kind of wonky. So when you add the water, it kind of pushes the color. So I'm going to go ahead and get blue. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to push this around. And you can see how it just kind of flows. Getting the paper wet first helps these watercolors to just kind of flow across the page. So feel free to just explore and just see how these colors handle. Okay. So now I might go ahead and add in some purple. So I still have a little purple on my plate here, so I'm going to utilize that. But I want it to be darker because remember we're creating a night sky. So feel free to push those colors around. And think about what the sky looks like right at dusk, right when there's a pretty sunset that afternoon, that evening, and the dark starts taking over. What colors do you see? I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of orange to my stars to just kind of brighten them up a little bit. Just a very little bit. Okay. Maybe I'm going to do, I think I'll go ahead and add a little bit more blue just to darken it up some. And you can see how it just automatically just spreads. Because you have the paper already wet, allowing it to easily flow. So you can see here how it's moving across the page. So the last step we need to do is add the black. So when you add black to watercolor, I always do it last because it can easily overtake your painting. And as I told the students in class today, it always makes me nervous because you work so hard on a painting and then you start adding black and it can make or break because it can easily take over. So you can see how it moves. Now you can add black maybe just to the top half of your painting. Maybe mix it in a little bit. Okay, I had to pause from my painting for a moment. So it's all dried up, but let's go ahead and let's see what we can do. So I'm gonna add some more black. Oof, too dark. So I put some black on my plate, got a little too dark. So I'm gonna add some more to it here, and let's go back over it. And let's see what we got. So with this paper being dry now, it's not going to move and be as flowy as it once was. But if you do the black really thin, you're gonna see the blue and the purple shine through. which is going to turn out to be really pretty. So I'm just going to keep going over. Soften that up a little bit. Let's go that. Now we have black filling up the paper. Now my paper is wet again, and now we can add some more. So now I want to make it a little bit darker. So maybe over here in the corners. I think I'm going to have the dark come from this upper side here, work its way down. But I got this puddle, so I'm going to push this around here a little bit. So as you're working with these watercolors, just get a feel for how they mix, how they flow, different techniques that you can utilize that can get you possible effect that you want. And keep in mind, you know, you're going to do some of these techniques we practice, you might not do in your actual project. So we're doing these so you can get some experience on just using the watercolor paints, and you're going to choose what techniques are going to work best for the subject matter that you choose. So if you haven't chosen a theme or a subject matter, keep thinking of what you're going to want to paint, whether it be a landscape, maybe it's a sunset, a beach scene, maybe you want to try and paint your grandma's house, right? So keep thinking of those things, because that's going to determine what techniques you utilize. So until then, we'll just keep practicing different things. Okay, my sky looks like it's dark here and it's getting lighter over there. I might add just a little touch of yellow down here and see what we get. Just push that around a little bit and let's see how it dries. Add a little bit of orange now, maybe a little more. Okay, I'm gonna let this dry and I'll be back. Okay, so here we are with painting that is almost dry, our night sky, and we're using the wet on wet technique. Here's another look of one completely dry. There's another one as well. Happy painting.